What is up, guys? How is everyone doing? It's been a couple months. It's been a few months since I've posted a video up here. I don't know how my lighting. If I turn this overhead light above me, it's going to be very bright. Maybe that's better. I'm at a hotel currently, as you can tell by the bed. So pardon my backdrop. So the reason I came back on, obviously by the thumbnail, you figured it out. I want to now post shooting of Renee Good. I want to kind of chime in on my opinion because I've held off ever since that happened a couple weeks ago. I've held off because a lot of reasons, um, mainly because all the information hasn't been, I don't know, kind of disseminated through the media and all of that stuff. I pretty much already kind of made my decision on how I felt about it a couple weeks ago when I first saw it. But I didn't want to rush to any type of conclusion on my part. And so I have kind of gone through other people's videos, mainly not necessarily right or left or whatever lean that they have, but specifically lawyers, people who do this for a living, people who prosecute um, people who do bad things. And as a rule, they are pretty much. I'm not going to say they're not biased, but for the most part, you can pretty much trust what a lawyer is going to say, especially on YouTube, because they're usually trying to use the law as a way of coming to conclusions. So, having said that, there's one particular lawyer, Southern Law Draw, which he has grown quite exponentially through the last year or so that I've been watching him. And I appreciated his view and his comments on the video, whereas law is concerned, right? So I'm going to take some of what he says and kind of add it to my own narrative. But at the same time, I'm going to bring up this other lawyer who has, I don't even know who he is, but he's got like 3 million plus subscribers. And he talks very fast. So his brain is working as fast as his mouth can talk, which is always a good sign to me because I don't like those pauses. I don't like where somebody is like, how do I put this in a certain way where it feels right? So with this guy, because he talks so fast, he's pretty confident in what he's talking about. And obviously, whether it's scripted or not, if it's scripted, he does a very good job of memorizing the script. So I'm going to preface my take on it because I'm going to chime in a couple of things that he didn't really hit on, but Southern Draw Law did. First and foremost, this whole idea, this whole left and right, and Republican and Democrat, and blah blah blah, and how you fall should be what the facts are and not what you voted for. I'm going to say it like that. But the biggest problem is when the government, who's run by, I don't even want to say his name, but you know who he is, the Orange Man. When the government is run by the Orange Man, who incessantly lies every time he talks about something, can't stop it. When he lies all the time, and then the minions in the government follow his lead because they don't want to get in trouble with the emperor, then it becomes a right and left thing. The irony is the right basically gave a thumbs up and a green flag to the insurrection, the rioters on January, what was it, January 8th, on the Capitol, where those people beat up cops, right? So on one hand, they're saying it's okay to beat up the cops. Like, that's because that's what our emperor told us, that it's okay to beat up cops. But then on the other hand, with this incident, they're like rah rah for the cop because that's what the emperor told them to say. So it's a bit odd to me. And I come from as much as an unbiased opinion as I possibly can. I don't have experience in law enforcement, but I used to be a fireman, so I worked with law enforcement intermittently. I'm also a veteran. Thank you. You're welcome. So I have a very strong opinion insofar as what government officials, people who raise their hand and give the oath to uphold the Constitution. And so my whole impetus for my opinion and my narrative has to do with constitutional rights. Renee Good had a constitutional right to do what she was doing. I'm just going to say it flat out like that. The cops that were there, the federal cops that were there, had a constitutional that they raised their hand about, had a constitutional they had a duty to uphold her constitutional rights because that's what they raised their hand and swore to, an allegiance to the Constitution, not to the emperor, not to the minions, not to the right wing and the left wing. It was to the Constitution. So I'm going to, as much as I can, I talk a lot, but as much as I can, I'm going to give my take, my short take on it, and then I'm going to let this other lawyer chime in on his opinion. And mine is a little bit mixed with his, but also some of the stuff that he didn't talk about. So I'm going to say this. There's a lot of things going on, and the video's all over the internet, so you can watch it, and he's going to show part of it, and so I'm not going to drag out the video and talk about certain points, but basically what she was doing by protesting, albeit in her car, but she was protesting. There are some, and again, I don't want to do the right left thing, but there are some say that she's blocking traffic, which is BS, because if you watch the video, clearly there were people passing by her. She was kind of like, the back end of her vehicle was in the bicycle lane, as it were. Only part of it was in the lane of traffic, and then the other lane was free and clear. People had passed by just prior to that. And even the truck that came up and blew its lights and sirens and all that stuff, the government truck, could have easily gone around her. So she wasn't blocking anything, first of all. Even if she was blocking traffic, federal agents have no power over traffic law. So their response should have been, let me call the local cops here because this is a traffic law violation. Federal agents have no responsibility to municipality traffic laws. They just don't. So they were in the wrong to begin with. And then the other side argues the point, well, she was interfering with government, what is it called? Official government conduct, or whatever the case was, the technical term for that, which wasn't true. They were actually leaving. They had already done what they were doing and they were trying to leave. So they were just driving the road like you and I would do. They were just driving the road like a bus going by would do, right? So they weren't in an official capacity. That they were federal agents is irrelevant because they weren't carrying out a operation at that point. Conversely, had they been trying to get by her and she was blocking in some way, shape, or form, and they were on their way to arrest somebody, or they were chasing somebody, or they were in a capacity of doing their duty, that's a different story. But the law makes it very clear in their lawful capacity of their responsibility, their duty. The federal law makes it clear that that's the only way that you can obstruct a federal agent is in their work, right? They weren't working. So there's a lot of stuff that happened prior to all of this shooting that negates any type of defense that those agents would have. They had no right to stop her for a traffic violation. They weren't carrying out any federal duties at that time. So they had no right to even tell her to get out of the car or put their hand on her door or anything like that. They weren't in that hemisphere of conducting any type of federal duty. So that's the other problem. Straight from the get-go, that they went up and confronted her at the door, right? and tried to open the door and all that stuff, which freaked her out, which caused her to want to, you get this fight or flight mode, and she chose the flight because she wasn't running from, there was no lawful arrest. They couldn't have arrested her for anything. She wasn't obstructing, and she didn't break any type of laws that they could enforce because they weren't in their federal capacity at that point. So there's no arrest that could have taken place, but she didn't know that, you see, and that's why she chose the flight. Arguably, it wasn't, how would I say it? It wasn't like, oh, I broke a law and now I have to flee. It was just, you know what? I don't want to deal with this, so now I'm leaving. That's the way I look at it. So again, when you watch a video and the guy that shot her walks by her and she says, I'm not mad at you. And he continues to walk around the video with the phone in his hand. And as he gets to the quarter panel, which you're not supposed to do, as any law enforcement officer knows, you don't stand in harm's way. You don't. Not in the front of the car, not in the quarter panel, not where you have a duty to not have a danger presented to you. And the lawyer is going to talk about this too. That's the first thing that, even before I watched any of the lawyer videos, that's the first thing that yelled out at me. Why is he over at the quarter panel? Why would he put himself in harm's way? And then the fact that he had, because we didn't know this until last week, he had his phone in his hand. And anybody that shoots guns, anybody that shoots guns knows that this is how you handle a gun, both hands on a gun. So if you're trying to shoot somebody, you don't have a phone up and then pull your gun out with the phone still in your hand. You drop the phone and put your hand up. Anyway, that was a third problem, is that he put himself in harm's way. And when I used to watch cops back in the 80s, bad boys, what you gonna do? I saw that a lot. I saw that so many times where the cops would literally put themselves in harm's way to justify the shooting. And then decades later, it became policy with most all departments not to do that. That's a big no-no. Don't put yourself in harm's way, but he did. And he pulled out his gun prior to her trying to flee, and he had a duty, a responsibility to retreat. All he had to do is back up 2 steps. And he wasn't dragged the way the POS emperor talked about. He wasn't dragged. Any type of training that you have in the government, and I think this would also apply to ICE, but in the Army, in the military, in the fire department, when I was a fireman, training and all that stuff, you go through a lot of rigorous training and you get bruised and you get hurt. Like, I don't mean like literally you're bleeding and stuff like that, but you get bumped around. You get bumped around when you're fighting with your friends, play fighting. Whatever happened to him was nothing more than that. It wasn't any type of internal injury and internal bleeding. They're calling his internal bleeding, which is a bruise. Hello, I have internal bleeding. Look at the bruise I have on my arm. So I suffered internal bleeding. So that narrative is garbage. The fact that he was able to walk over, and some people like, yeah, but look at him. He's got a little gait. He's got a little limp. First of all, he's walking on ice. Second of all, he just shot somebody. And so he's careful not to slip on the ice and all that stuff, and then thirdly, you never see him get hit in the leg because you have the angle from the side from somebody up in an apartment building or something like that. And never did he get hit. And if he got bumped, it was a minor bump at that. So this whole idea that, he had a right to shoot her because he was in fear for his life is garbage. And if you watch some of the other videos, and you can go through them, when she turns her head, and Southern Draw Law points this out and shows it in slow motion, which I'm not going to do because, again, I don't want this video to go on forever. But in slow motion, he's got his phone up, the cop that murdered the woman. He's got his phone up like this, right, prior to him shooting. And you can see her still talking to the other agent. And as she ends the conversation with the other agent, she looks down. So she didn't even know he was there at that point. She looks down because guess what? That's where the gear shift is at. So she looks down to put the car in drive because it had been in reverse, or maybe it was park at that time. but she puts it in drive, and then her wheels are already starting to turn. So she made every effort whatsoever, I mean, every effort possible to actually move out of the way. With her wheels turned, it was obvious, and she was shifting. And when she finally did look up, she already had her foot on the gas. And that's when the shooting happened. Then on top of that, he shot her basically point blank range right through the windshield, and then followed it up as he moved away with 2 more shots, which is wrong. And then on top of that, not calling for an ambulance right away, or I guess they got blocked. The agents wouldn't let the ambulance in. And even though she probably wouldn't have survived anyway, it was just a dismal, disgusting behavior by ICE. And again, I'm not anti-ICE. I'm not anti-immigration by no stretch. I feel like there's way too many people here illegal, especially the criminals. But I feel like with the type of training that they should have to be out in the public, especially civilian public, see, they're not at war with an enemy. That's different. The civilian public, that they're going around asking for papers. I'm kind of a World War II buff. I'm just fascinated by World War II and Hitler and Germany and all that stuff. Back in the day, I read up a lot about that stuff. And even when I went to Germany, I went to, they have museums there. They can't display anything that has to do with the war outside, but inside they have all kinds of displays of uniforms and all that stuff. It's fascinating. The Gestapo asking for papers, especially when it came to the Jews. Let me see your papers. Let me see your papers. They're out in the street asking for papers. This is the exact same thing in my country that I gave potentially my life for, to protect and defend both my country and the Constitution. And then the Constitution is just torn up, just like, we don't care about the Constitution. This doesn't mean anything to us. That's what your emperor thinks, because he decides what's going to happen going forward, like he did with ICE invading our cities. And then ultimately his Department of Justice is going to decide to prosecute or not. And I guarantee you that cop will not be prosecuted. And that's disgusting too. That it disgusts me, because wrong or right, it really doesn't matter right or left, right? It shouldn't be a left and a right thing. It should be, not to mince words, it should be the correct thing to do, is to at least let the evidence come out. Prosecute them. Hell yeah, prosecute them. Let the evidence come out. And if a jury decides, you know what, he didn't do anything wrong, he was in fear for his life, blah, 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 whatever the narrative is that people like to espouse, because he hasn't spoken. I was in fear for my life, and da-da-da. And apparently he got dragged by another car months ago or last year or something like that. So he could have had a little PTSD going on. He shouldn't have been in that capacity, if that's the case. He should not have been in that capacity to be able to take somebody else's life, and in my opinion, unjustly, because there was no need for it. As I started the video with, all those things that happened shouldn't have happened to begin with. There should have been no confrontation, because she didn't do anything wrong. Period. Everything past that is semantics. Everything past that is irrelevant. Because had they not done the actions that they took, she would still be alive. And they had no right to do the actions they took to begin with. Anyway, I'm going to bring this guy up and let him, how do I do this? Oh, so let me bring him up and I'll get my ugly mug out of the way.
Contradicts the administration's allegations that Miss Good was running him over or attempting to run over Mr. Ross when he fired her. Although other grainier video footage filmed from a different angle could appear to support this conclusion, but when this footage is synchronized with the closer footage, it's clear that Agent Ross was not run over by the SUV and in fact emerged unscathed. After being shot in the head, Miss Good's SUV then veers into a white car parked further down the road before crashing to a stop. The agents witnessing the scene do not appear to rush to provide emergency medical care to Miss Good. Eventually, Agent Ross approaches the vehicles and instructs his colleagues to call 911. Other agents can be seen blocking several bystanders who attempt to provide medical care, including one who identifies himself as a physician.
I go check a pulse.
No! Back up! Now!
I'm a physician.
I don't care.
Going back to the footage that Mr. Ross took himself, there's a couple of things that we can glean from this. Number one is that Miss Good appears very calm as a driver, arguably snarky.
That's fine, dude. I'm not mad at you.
Which might have been her undoing. There seem to be conflicting orders. Some people are yelling, get out. Some are yelling, get out of the car. You can also see clearly from Mr. Ross's vantage point that Miss Good is looking all the way away from him as she backs up and also turns the wheel all the way to the right. In other words, turning to get out of that situation and not towards any of the agents. You can also tell from the footage that the engine is revving at this time, indicating that the car is going to speed up. But at the same time, this is all taking place at a very low rate of speed, close to zero, as she's doing what is obviously a 2-point turn. At the same time that another agent appears to be lunging into the driver's side door in an effort to apparently turn the wheel to the left towards the agents. You can also see Ross switches his phone from his right hand to his left that frees up his right hand to pull out his firearm. But it's also clear that he never drops the phone and continues recording in his left hand while simultaneously taking his firearm out with his right hand and shoots at least twice. It also seems pretty clear that the reason he was arguably in front of the car was for video recording purposes and that at any time he could have gotten out of the way. And I will opine at this time that holding your cell phone in one hand while firing with the other seems pretty reckless, if not depraved indifference to the human life.
You want to come at us? I say go get yourself some lunch, big boy. Go ahead.
Out of the car. Get out of the car. Get out of
See, in my opinion, the other agent that's talking to her has absolutely no authority to tell her to exit the car. None. Because no law was broken. So he can't even arrest her for anything. The only two things that she did wrong is supposedly obstruct traffic, which is a municipality type of thing. You know, the agent would have to call the cops because they have no authority over traffic in cities like this. The only second thing that they could say is that they were obstructing, you know, like official duties, which they weren't officially doing any duties. They were trying to leave like everybody else was.
Now, given the Trump administration's refusal to participate in the investigation, and the fact that this video comes seemingly directly from Mr. Ross's cell phone, it's extremely likely this video was leaked by either Mr. Ross himself or someone in the chain of custody at the Department of Homeland Security, probably because they think that this video is exculpatory, which seems likely given that it was leaked to a right-wing news source. And as is the case in many instances, evidence can and often does support two diametrically opposed arguments at the same time. But from all angles, the video footage depicts a hostile, clumsy, and unnecessarily violent operation. The Minnesota officials have stated their intent to hold unlawful actors in the shooting incident criminally accountable. And to bring charges against a peace officer for the use of deadly force, the state must be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the officer's use of deadly force was not justified. Section 609.066 of the Minnesota Code governs the authorized use of deadly force by peace officers. Now, assuming for purposes of this analysis that the offending ICE agent would be deemed a peace officer, which is not 100% certain, there's not a lot of case law on this, there is a possibility that a Minnesota jury could convict the ICE agent under the present circumstance. How likely that would be remains to be seen. Now, Minnesota's applicable statute permits the use of deadly force when, quote, an objectively reasonable officer would believe, based on the totality of the circumstances known to the officer at the time and without the benefit of hindsight, that such force is necessary to protect the peace officer or another from death or great bodily harm, provided that the threat can be articulated with specificity, is reasonably likely to occur absent action by the law enforcement officer, and must be addressed through the use of deadly force without unreasonable delay. Now, the statute also permits the use of deadly force to, quote, affect the arrest or capture or prevent the escape of a person whom the peace officer knows or has reasonable grounds to believe has committed or attempted to commit a felony, and the officer reasonably believes that person will cause the death or great bodily harm to another person unless immediately apprehended. As stated by the city attorney's office of Hennepin County, where the incident took place, this statute provides a, quote, significant defense to criminal charges brought against an officer accused of the use of deadly force. And under this defendant-friendly statute, it would be difficult, but not necessarily impossible, to prosecute Agent Ross for the unlawful use of deadly force.
I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because this is not really what I wanted to put across in my video. Let me see.
Is extremely favorable to the officers themselves. But it's also possible that the analysis is different. To drive away from the ICE agents would cause death or bodily harm to anyone so as to justify her shooting. Now, given that ICE is trying to add everyone's information to their databases, it's probably a good time to wipe all of your personal and private information off the internet. Your cell phone number, home address, email, data on me. Luckily, in court, under Minnesota law. But under this scenario, the state would bear the burden of proving beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Ross was not acting in self-defense, encircling it on the right side as he takes video with his phone and re-emerging near the driver's front side of the car, and he first draws his gun as the SUV reverses away from him. And while the aggressor in an incident generally has no right to claim self-defense under Minnesota law, an original aggressor can still claim self-defense if he actually and in good faith withdrew from the conflict and communicated that withdrawal expressly or impliedly to his intended victim. But here, the video footage shows no withdrawal or communication of withdrawal. To the contrary, it shows Mr. Ross originally instigating the incident and then proceeding with the escalation of tactics, nearing the vehicle, drawing his weapon and aiming it at Miss Good. And another hurdle facing Mr. Ross in a self-defense analysis is his failure to retreat. A valid self-defense claim requires the, quote, absence of a reasonable possibility of retreat to avoid the danger. And the Minnesota Supreme Court has explained that a reasonable opportunity to retreat exists if there are, quote, options for escape or avoidance of peril rather than directly confronting someone. And here the video footage shows that Mr. Ross had time to get out of the way of the SUV because he did. Mr. Ross was not trapped. He was not unfettered in his ability to escape, back away, or otherwise protect himself. And in fact, he had the opportunity to take out his gun and shoot the driver. If I was the prosecutor, I would certainly argue that a reasonable officer would have done everything that they can to get out of the way first before even thinking of unholstering their firearm. And of course, maybe put the video camera down too. Mr. Ross did neither and still was seemingly unscathed. This failure to retreat or safely avoid the confrontation before resorting to force likely dooms any claim of self-defense in a non-peace officer scenario. On top of that, the state could argue that Mr. Ross did not have a reasonable basis to believe that he was in imminent danger of death and that the discharge of his firearm was necessary to avert that danger. That's because an objective standard applies to the amount of force used. In other words, the force must be proportionate to the threat and limited to that which would appear to be necessary to a reasonable person under the circumstances. Lastly, it's come to light that Mr. Ross is a 10-year veteran of ICE and was involved in the prior months in a similar situation that did result in his injury. And although Mr. Ross would likely argue that his past experience of being dragged by a car in a previous ICE enforcement operation demonstrates his actual and honest belief that he was in imminent danger of death or great bodily harm, the state might use that same evidence to show that he was still traumatized by that incident and his belief was unreasonable. Now, as
Right. And that's what I talked about, some PTSD or something like that, thinking that, oh no, here we go again type of thing. But here's an interesting thing too, because I've debated this with a few people that believe the emperor and the emperor's minions. Let's say, for argument's sake, that she woke up that morning and decided, you know what, I'm going to run down an ICE officer. Okay. Which I'm sure she didn't do, but let's say she did, for argument's sake. Do you know how easy and quick that would have been? He wouldn't have had time to fire his gun. There was no time to fire his gun if all she wanted to do is hit the accelerator, turn her wheel back to straight, and then plow him down. She could have done that very easily. Another interesting thing. The way the vehicle, after she was shot the first time, definitively shows that her wheels were already turned and she was trying to get out of there and not hit him. Where did the vehicle go? It didn't go to him. It went the other direction. The direction she had her wheels, that she had already pre-positioned her wheel to be in. Because she was shot. She couldn't control that vehicle. That's why it went out of control in the other direction of where he was at. And that's another interesting thing, too, that nobody talks about. Anyway, I wanted to chime in. I didn't want to, play this whole lawyer thing. You can go watch his channel if you want to finish the video. I think it's about 30 minutes, and so is this one. And I didn't mean it to be that long. But I definitely wanted my opinion to be heard because it's the world according to Bob. Hello. See, it's right down there, The world according to Bob. So that's the way I feel about it. And if there's any younger people, and my channel is more or less dedicated to younger people, if you look at my content that I've posted before, it has to do with bank accounts. It has to do with don't waste your time in life. Don't have a bucket list, do all these things, be responsible, do the right thing always. And, it all has to do with the younger set mind that going forward with the experience of life that I have, that I could give advice for. So if any of you guys are watching that are younger that plan on becoming a cop, why, I don't know, or a federal agent of some sort or something like that, take heed. You guys work for us. You guys, when I was a fireman, it was the same way. And I remember in the fire academy, there was a certain phrase that it can't come out of my head. It's drilled into me. Sometimes you're at an accident scene and, you know, the person is obviously DOA and there's family members around and all that stuff. And, you know, they're yelling and screaming, do something. And you know, you can't do anything. You still act as if you are anyway. And then when the ambulance door is shut, you can stop what you're doing. But in the meantime, you're putting on a front for the public because that's what you're there to serve. And when they start yelling at you, they're not yelling at you as a person, they're yelling at your badge because you represent that organization. And so if you ever plan on wearing a badge of any sort, remember you work for the public. And I don't want to hear this crap about, oh, I pay taxes too as a government person. Of course you do. That's not the point. You work for us. When you get that check from the federal government, it doesn't say Joe Blow Steakhouse, or it doesn't say McDonald's, or it says the people of the United States right there on the check. The people of the United States is presenting you this money for your work. You didn't earn that money. It was given to you. It was taken from us and given to you. You didn't earn it. You earned it after the fact because you worked for it after the fact, but you didn't earn it. You didn't go into a job the same way that I do in my work. I don't get paid until after, you know, like I've done the job and it has to be done correctly. So there's a big difference with public service. Public service is a good thing. I've worked both, as I said, you know, in the Army, as a fireman, Red Cross volunteer. I've done a lot of things for my community, and I just feel strongly about what I believe. And I'm not right or left. You know, I own guns. And they say, oh, Democrats don't like the Second Amendment. That's not true. I voted Republican in the past before because I felt it was a better option in the past, in the way past. So I don't like the POS that's currently the Emperor of the United States. I don't like him. I think he's disgusting, nasty, vile. But I thought that before he ever held office. I thought he was just disgusting then. And he's even more so now because he has power. So no, I don't like him. Because I base and judge people on character, morals and character. Even with Clinton, I did not have sexual relations with that woman, in a deposition where he knew he was lying, dropped his character level down to here. I had no respect for him anymore. So it's not the person, it's the character of the person. You know, there was a lot of people I didn't like, you know, that were in government before. You know, John McCain, I didn't agree with him. He was Republican. I didn't agree with most of the stuff that he did, but I respected him because he had character, because he managed to be a POW in Vietnam where he didn't have to be. His father was high up in the Pentagon and he had a free ticket out of that POW camp. And he said, no, I'm not leaving until my men leave with me. That's character. Anyway, I'm done with my diatribe. I hope you guys got something from this, entertainment, information, something. I don't know. It, you know, like I said, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. It's about, you know, my life according to Bob. And your opinion may vary, and it probably does. But that's what I think about that. I don't know what the next one will be. I don't know when it will be. When something pops up that I feel very strongly about, or that I can give some type of information from my perspective, then that's when you'll see the next video. That's the best I can tell you. But anyway, other than that, have a good day or night or morning or whatever it is that you watch this video. Bye.